Hello, I'm John Fout with Pure Renovations, local general contractor. We've been getting a lot of phone calls from adjusters, other contractors, insurance companies, realtors, asking questions about ventilation, why their potential buyers or their customers are having problems with. In layman's terms, I want to break this down for you guys to explain to you how it works and why you have those problems if you do, and how to fix them. So let's get into this explanation, okay, how this works. Yet again, not an artist, so I'm going to show you Snoopy's doghouse for the people that remember Snoopy. Now the way this works is pretty simple. You have to have intake and you have to have exhaust. Now there's several different ways to come up with intake and exhaust. However, it all does pretty much the same thing. Some of them do them better than others, and I'll get into that a little bit. But your intake, right, you have an opening of some way on your outside edge of your roof. All right. Now the way that works is air will go into your roof from that area, hence the word intake, right? Now once it gets in the attic space, we have to have something to get that air out of the attic space, correct? And that would be your exhaust. For this explanation, I'm going to show you a ridge vent, which is my favorite way of exhausting any type of moisture or anything out of your attic space, just because of how much it allows. Because now you have your air coming in, right? And then you have it escaping out of the house. Okay, that's going to be your balance system, which there is some math involved with that balance system that you can find online. It'll tell you per square inch of attic space, how much ventilation to have, how much intake and exhaust to have, which typically it's going to be equal amounts. I want you guys to understand why this works. Now, here's an unbalanced system, which is what you don't want on your house. Yet again, Snoopy's doghouse. And a lot of people think of ventilation, hey, the more I can get, the better we're going to be. However, a lot of the times they work against each other. For example, let's say that you have a ridge vent on your house, okay? And then you have a gable end vent on your house, okay? Now, let's say that you also have soffit vents on your house, right, for your intake. However, what happens is your ridge vent is going to pull, your exhaust is going to pull from the closest cavity, which would be your gable end vent. So what happens is the air is going to come in your gable end vent and then go out of the peak, okay? So all this air down here is laying stagnant, which is a big problem. For mold, moisture issues, attic rain, so on and so forth. So obviously we want to make sure that we're collecting the intake from down here at this level, not up here. So same explanation for a box vent. I see this more often than not, is people will have a roof, right? And then they're going to have a box vent on this roof. And then somebody told them that, hey, you should really improve to a ridge vent. So here's your ridge vent. Same situation. So that ridge vent's going to be pulling as the air goes over top of it, creates a vacuum, and it starts pulling out of this attic space, but it's going to pull from the closest point. The closest point at that point would be your box vents, right? So there you go. Yet again, down here, we're still collecting moisture. We're still collecting heat. Which is not something that we want in our attic space. Now, what is something that can be caused from lack of ventilation? Obviously, premature curling of your shingles, cracking of your shingles. They don't last as long as they should. People call me all the time like, hey, I just had this roof put on 15 years ago and it's cracking, it's leaking, I'm having problems. I explained to them that's probably because of your ventilation and we have to go out and take a look at it for them. In most cases, what happens is if you have a 90-degree day outside, right, and it's hot outside, right? 90 degrees and you have all this sun beating on the side of your house. Well, the problem is in your attic space, let's say it's 170 degrees. I don't know the exact amount or the exact degree, but it's obviously warmer in your attic space. If you've ever been in your attic space, you know what I'm talking about. Now, here's what happens. So this heat is trying to escape out of the house through your shingles, through the wood, right? This sun's beating down on it. So what you're getting is your shingles baking. So if you've ever looked at somebody's house that has curling shingles, things of that nature, that's the reason for it, is because it's actually baking from both sides. So obviously we want to get this heat, especially in the summertime, we want to get this heat out of the attic space, right? So the best way to do it, yet again, is to make sure you have your intake and your exhaust. Okay, so that's your summertime reasons. Now your wintertime reasons are even more important. I say more important because this is going to cause more damage to your home than just a bad roof. So let's say it's wintertime, right? And you have a lot of moisture being pumped up in your attic space. Once it's being pumped up in your attic space and you don't have correct amount of ventilation to get it out of the attic space, it just sets in there, all right? So now what happens is all that heat's coming out of your house too because you're heating your house. So now you have moisture and heat getting in your attic space, okay? Now what happens when heat hits cold? Obviously we know you get condensation, right? So this is when you run into what they call attic rain. I had a customer call me about a year ago and they said, our roof is leaking. And I said, well, I got to see this. So I went out there and I popped my head in the attic space. Keep in mind, it was a dry day, no snow on the roof. So I get out there and I go up in the attic space and I take a look at this and it's raining in their attic, okay? So I called the customer and I had them come up there and take a look at it and said, hey, this is what you got going on. And they said, John, what is happening, right? Well, here's what's happening yet again. Their heat's coming out of their house, right? The moisture's that up to 4 gallons a day is coming out of their house, right? And it's going up and it's hitting all this cold temperatures. There's your condensation. So typically where you'll see it is if you pop in your attic today, look at the nail heads in your attic. They're rusted. Why would they be rusted? Because of the moisture, right? So what happens is all that rain starts dripping off of your nail heads, off your underside of your sheeting. You start developing mold, things of that nature. So the balanced system for ventilation is extremely important. And there's also a lot to do with insulation on that too, to try to keep this heat down in your home. Okay, now let's talk about the insulation and how that performs with the ventilation. Yet again, you guys are going to get tired of seeing the Snoopy's doghouse, but let's roll that up here again. Now what happens when we were talking about the attic rain, now this is how you control the attic rain even further with insulation, okay? Most attic spaces are under insulated, right? So they have maybe a little bit insulation up here, okay? Well, the problem with that is you're still getting a lot of this heat escaping, which A, leads to higher energy bills, right? And B, yet again, you do not want in the wintertime, you do not want a bunch of heat in your attic space that can obviously cause attic rain, okay? So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're adequately insulated. Now, here's another phone call that I got from a local realtor that called me and said, hey, John, I have a customer that had a new roof put on their house and they have leaks at every corner of their house. Not in the middle of the rooms, but every corner. Can you help? So obviously I went out there and I took a look at it for him. And at that time, the homeowner also had somebody else out there looking at it, like a handyman service or whatever, trying to figure it out. And when we got out there, I said, okay, so when was the roof put on? It was put on the year previous. And I said, so when did you notice this? And they said, here this winter. We started noticing that we're leaking in every corner of the house. Well, there's 6 or 8 different corners in that house. So for every exact corner of the house to be leaking, that's weird, right? So what I did is I went up in the attic space with the contractor that was there, the handyman service, and I said, so what do you think? Which I knew immediately after I got up in the attic space what was going on. He said, oh, I'm not really sure. Well, what had happened is pretty simple. The people that insulated the house right after the roof was installed, right, they went up and they sprayed a bunch of insulation in the attic space. Now, they didn't do a bad job, didn't do a great job, but they did spray a ton of insulation up in the attic space, which should help with this, right? Heat escape in the house. However, here was the problem. When they sprayed in all this insulation, they did not put baffles over here, okay? What a baffle is that's a styrofoam implant that you put in between the rafters or the trusses of a house to make sure that the airflow from your intake can still go into the attic space, right? If those baffles aren't there, what happens is when they spray in this insulation, they spray it all the way through, okay? And they spray it all the way through. Now you have no way of getting anything out of that attic space, okay? That's one side of it. Now, the other side of it is, and this particular one, they didn't get far enough over. It was a hip roof. It was a little bit of a confusing for those of you who know what hip roofs are. It was a little tougher spot to make sure that you can get the insulation all the way back in the corner. So in this setup, they sprayed all this insulation in, and they got it about 90%, right? and they got all the way to that 10% mark, which is the outside wall of the house, and they didn't get any insulation in there because it was super tight from roof to structure, okay? They couldn't get in there. So what was happening is obviously all this is blocked tight with insulation, so when this heat came up in the house, it was coming up, and then it was coming over, and then it was shooting up right where the outside walls are of the house, okay? Now, you guys gotta know where I'm going at with this. So when it squirted up on the outside edges of the house, now that's every corner of that house that did not have the insulation was leaking. Wasn't leaking from the roof, right? It was that condensation we were talking about. It was cold up here, super cold up here, draping down into here, right? And then this hot air was hitting it, and then all of a sudden you had condensation and the moisture was running right here in those overhang areas, okay? So obviously, it's not just the ventilation, which is, yet again, the intake. It's not just that. We obviously want to have that, right? And we want to make sure we keep that after installation by putting the baffles in so you're still getting airflow, okay? But you have to have the insulation, right? Let's try to keep all that heat in the house rather than escape it in your attic space. And you guys know next time, if somebody comes to insulate your home, you make sure they're putting baffles in between your rafters so you still have your intake, right? And you also want to make sure they're putting enough insulation in the attic space to make sure that you stay warm. Now we've talked about the ventilation side of things, we've talked about the insulation side of things. Now how do we fix it if we do have a problem? There's a lot of information out there on the internet. Air vent is a good one. GAF also has a good one as far as determining your per square inch of attic space, how much ventilation that you need. The other side is make sure that the contract that you're picking is doing things and they understand exactly how this process works, so you make sure you get the best bang for your buck. Now, if you need personalized help on how to get this all taken care of for you, you can go to purerenovations.com and be more than happy to take care of you. And thanks you guys for watching, we appreciate it. If this actually is beneficial to you, make sure that you click the like and the subscribe button at the bottom, and stay tuned for more videos on different building practices. And from Pure Renovations, keep building.